The Arizona frontier did not forgive. The afternoon heat rolled across the dry plains like waves from a furnace, swallowing sound, breath, and mercy alike. Dust shimmered in the distance where the land met the sky, and somewhere along a narrow trail cut through the wilderness, a lone rider moved slowly. But he wasn't a drifter anymore. Luke Tanner was a ranch owner, a man who had built a life with his own calloused hands and lost almost everything to time. He wasn't searching for cattle that day. He was searching for quiet, though the West rarely offered any. His horse trod carefully, nostrils flaring at the weight of the heat. Luke sat tall in the saddle, coat faded from years of sun, hat brim pulled low. His face, marked by wind and loss, carried the calm of a man who'd fought too many storms and survived each one without bitterness. He knew the rhythm of the land, the pulse of silence before trouble. And that silence broke when a figure stumbled out from the brush ahead. A small boy, barefoot, his steps faltering, his breath torn and ragged. Luke yanked the reins, stopping inches before the child collapsed in front of the horse. The boy's voice cracked with panic. "Please, sir! You have to help my mother!" Luke's blue-gray eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. "Slow down, son. What happened?" "She's tied to a rock. Please, she'll die out there." His words tumbled out between gasps, his thin chest heaving, his face streaked with sweat and dust. Luke didn't move right away. A man who lived alone on the frontier learned not to trust every story he heard. Bandits used children as bait sometimes. But there was something in this boy's eyes, a fear too real to fake. Luke swung off his horse, boots striking the cracked earth. He crouched so that his shadow covered the boy's trembling form. "Show me," he said, voice low and steady, the tone of a man used to giving orders that were meant to be obeyed. The boy pointed toward the rocky ridge beyond the scrub, his hand shaking. "This way. Please hurry." Luke hesitated only long enough to glance around, the kind of glance that measured every bush, every stretch of open land for danger. Then he nodded once. "Lead the way." They crossed the desert fast, the boy stumbling, Luke guiding him with a hand on his shoulder. His instincts, honed from years of wrangling cattle and fending off rustlers, stayed sharp. His palm rested near the revolver holstered at his hip. When they reached the rise of rock, Luke saw her, a woman. Tied upright against a pale boulder, her wrists bound so tight the ropes had cut through her skin. Her dark hair clung to her face, her dress, deerskin, torn and dusty, stuck to her body with sweat. The sun had burned her brown skin raw. She barely moved, her head tilted forward, lips cracked and dry. The sight hit Luke hard. The boy ran to her, crying, "Mama!" His voice broke on the word. Luke followed, pulling his hunting knife from his belt. With swift, practiced movements, he sliced through the ropes. The woman's arms dropped, her body collapsing forward. He caught her before she hit the ground. She was light as driftwood, frail and hot to the touch. He carried her to the shade of a mesquite tree nearby and knelt, lowering her gently. His canteen came off his belt. He tilted it to her lips. Water spilled over her chin before she managed to swallow a few gulps. Her eyelids fluttered open, and for a fleeting second, her dark eyes, fierce even through fever, met his. No words came. She didn't need them. Luke soaked a rag, wiping the dust and sweat from her wrists. The skin was torn and raw. The boy pressed close, whispering in a language Luke didn't understand, but the meaning was clear enough. Comfort, love, fear. He took a breath, scanning the empty horizon again. Whoever had done this hadn't meant for her to live. That much was certain. The woman was still breathing, but barely. He looked down at her, at the ropes lying useless on the ground, and he knew his choice was already made. He would not leave her here. Luke Tanner had buried a wife once, Lila, taken by sickness and the merciless winds of this same land. He would not stand by and watch another woman die under its cruelty. He adjusted his hat against the sun and glanced toward the boy. "She'll live," he said quietly. "But we need to move." The boy nodded, clutching his mother's hand as Luke lifted her into his arms. As they walked toward the distant canyon, the desert stretched silent and endless, but Luke Tanner's purpose was no longer the same. He wasn't just a rancher riding through empty land anymore. He was a man who had found something worth saving. Luke Tanner dipped a rag into his canteen and pressed it gently against the woman's wrists. The skin was raw, the marks deep from where the ropes had bitten through. She flinched but didn't pull away. Her boy, Caleb Grayhawk, knelt beside her, whispering soft words in Apache that Luke couldn't understand. But he didn't need to. The tone spoke clear enough. Comfort, love, fear wrapped in a child's trembling voice. Luke worked in silence, his movements slow and sure. He draped a worn blanket over the woman's shoulders, one that smelled faintly of dust and leather. It was thin, but it would do until nightfall. He sat back on his heel, studying what he'd stumbled into. Someone had tied her there on purpose, and that someone would not take kindly to a stranger cutting her free. Out here, kindness had a cost, and it was often paid in blood. Still, as Luke looked at the boy's shaking hands clutching his mother's arm and the faint rise and fall of her chest, he knew walking away wasn't an option. For years, his life had been a quiet pattern of work, solitude, and silence. But the moment his knife sliced through those ropes, all that had changed. He had taken responsibility without speaking a word. The woman leaned against the tree trunk, her breathing shallow. Her dark eyes blinked open, searching, restless even under the shade. The heat had drained the strength from her body, but her spirit was still there. Fragile, yet unbroken, Caleb clung to her side, refusing to let go. Luke stayed nearby, crouched a few feet away, his gaze calm and steady as he watched her fight her way back from the edge. He'd seen heat exhaustion before. Men falling on cattle drives, soldiers collapsing in the desert. He knew the look of a body too close to surrender. He poured a little more water onto the rag and dabbed it across her face, cooling her fevered skin. The boy murmured again in Apache, his voice shaking with relief. After a moment, the woman's lips moved. "Enough. No more water," she rasped, her English halting but clear enough. Luke nodded. "Too much will make you sick." Her eyes flickered toward him, faint recognition behind the exhaustion. He looked away toward the pale rock where she had been tied. His jaw tightened. This wasn't the work of bandits. Bandits didn't waste time on cruelty. This was the kind of punishment that came from townsfolk who wanted to feel righteous while doing something unforgivable. Maybe they'd accused her of stealing. Maybe they just wanted her gone. Either way, it didn't matter now. She was alive. And he was the reason. That alone bound him to whatever came next. Caleb looked up at him, eyes wet with fear. Will she live? Luke didn't answer right away. He studied the woman, Rosa Grayhawk, her breathing shallow but steady, the stubborn will in her eyes refusing to fade. Finally, he said, "She's strong. She'll make it." The words came rough but sure. It was enough to calm the boy. Luke rose and walked to his horse, loosening the straps of his saddlebag. He pulled out a strip of dried venison and a small bundle of hard bread. Back under the mesquite's shade, he set them down between them. Rosa stared at the food, but didn't move. The boy's stomach growled softly, and Luke caught it even though Caleb tried to hide the sound. Without a word, he softened a piece of bread with water and handed it to him first, then another to Rosa. Only when they both had eaten did he take a piece for himself. No one spoke, but questions filled the silence like echoes off canyon walls. Where had they come from? What had the town done to her? Would they come looking when they realized she was still breathing? Luke didn't ask. There'd be time for truth later. For now, all that mattered was survival. Water, shade, rest. Rosa's hands shook as she lifted the bread to her lips. Luke steadied it for her, touching only her wrist. She took a bite, chewing slowly, eyes downcast, shame flickering across her face. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in men broken by loss, stripped of dignity by the world's cruelty. He didn't speak, but his quiet presence told her what words could not, that she wasn't alone anymore. As the sun dipped lower, long shadows stretched across the clearing. Luke knew they couldn't stay. The rock where she'd been tied was too close, too visible. Whoever left her there might come back to finish what they started. He stood, the light cutting across his shoulders. "We can't stay here," he said. "There's a stream in that canyon." He pointed towards the ridge. "We'll find water and shelter there." Rosa looked at him, her lips dry, eyes clouded. "I can walk," she whispered. He crouched down beside her, voice low but firm. "We'll go slow. The boy stays close. I'll take the lead." Her chin lifted just a little, pride flickering through the exhaustion. She nodded. Luke adjusted his hat against the fading sun, watching as Rosa leaned on her son's shoulder. The boy's small frame braced under her weight, but he didn't falter. Luke Tanner, once a man content to live alone on his ranch with ghosts and silence, felt something shift inside him. He didn't ask for it, didn't want it, but it was there all the same. He'd stepped into someone else's fight, and now there was no turning back. Rosa Grayhawk met Luke Tanner's eyes for a long, silent moment before giving the smallest nod. Her pride was still there, thin but unbroken. When he reached out to help her stand, she didn't resist, but she didn't thank him either. Her legs trembled, nearly giving way, but she caught herself against the tree trunk. Her son, Caleb, slipped under her arm, supporting her as best he could. The boy was small, but his will carried more strength than his frame. Luke stood close, ready to catch her if she fell. Without a word, he laid his old wool blanket over her shoulders again, shielding her from the wind that had begun to roll in from the west. They started walking, slow, careful steps away from the clearing where the pale rock stood like a ghost in the distance. Luke led the way toward the distant canyon, every footfall measured, every glance backward deliberate. His mind worked quietly behind his calm expression. Would the town come looking for her? Would they call him a criminal for helping her? And why had he, a man who'd sworn never to care again, stepped into someone else's fight? He had no answers, only the certainty that once he cut those ropes, there was no going back. The three of them moved through the deepening dusk like shadows stitched to the land. Luke's jaw was tight beneath his beard. For years, his only purpose had been to work his ranch and survive one day at a time. But now, without his choosing, that had changed. He'd taken on something larger, something human. The walk to the canyon was slow. Rosa's steps faltered often. Her body had been pushed far beyond its limits. Caleb stayed close, his arm wrapped around her waist as if sheer love could keep her upright. Luke walked ahead, eyes scanning the horizon, every sense sharpened by habit. The desert had a way of hiding danger behind its silence. Dust clouds in the distance, faint echoes of hooves, or the cry of a bird that didn't belong. By the time they reached the canyon's edge, the sky burned red with evening. Luke led them down a narrow trail carved into the rock, one hand always ready at Rosa's arm when the ground turned loose under their feet. She never complained. Even when she stumbled, she caught herself again, her pride keeping her upright when strength alone could not. At the bottom, a small stream glimmered between the rocks, shaded by cottonwoods that whispered in the fading light. Caleb gasped, breaking free from his mother's grasp. He dropped to his knees and plunged his hands into the water, drinking in desperate gulps. Luke caught his shoulder with a firm hand. "Easy, son. Slow down." The boy froze, startled by the authority in the man's voice. Luke's tone wasn't harsh, but it carried the weight of experience. Caleb nodded, taking slower sips this time, glancing up at Luke as though trying to understand the kind of man he was. Rosa knelt beside the stream, her body trembling. Luke filled his canteen and offered it to her, holding it steady as she drank in small, careful swallows. Her breathing steadied, the faintest trace of color returning to her cheeks. Then Caleb spoke, his voice small but steady. "They said she stole bread from the store," he murmured, shame creeping into his words. "She didn't. They just wanted her gone." Luke's jaw tightened. He had suspected as much, but hearing it out loud lit a slow fire inside him. He'd seen this kind of justice before. Men and women punished not for crimes, but for being different, unwanted, or inconvenient. Folks like to call it law, but it was cruelty dressed up in order. He looked at Rosa. Her wrists were still raw and bleeding, but she held her chin high, refusing to meet his eyes. Pride, even in ruin. Luke respected that. He said nothing, because words couldn't undo what had been done. Instead, he busied himself with what mattered: survival. He gathered fallen branches, struck flint against steel, and coaxed a small fire to life. The boy watched closely, fear fading into curiosity as sparks turned to flame. Rosa leaned back against a rock, her gaze fixed on the dancing light like it was the first warmth she'd known in days. Luke took strips of dried meat from his saddlebag, softening them near the fire. He handed one to Caleb, then to Rosa. Only after they both had food did he eat a piece himself. The boy noticed. He chewed slowly, eyes flicking toward Luke as if trying to understand why the man put them first. Night fell heavy across the canyon. Coyotes howled far off among the ridges. Luke fed more wood into the flames, his revolver resting within arm's reach. Whoever had tied Rosa to that rock might come looking, and if they followed the boy's tracks, they'd find this canyon soon enough. The firelight flickered across Rosa's face as she shifted beneath the blanket. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice halting, the words rough from disuse. "Why, you help?" Luke looked at her, expression unreadable. For a long while, he said nothing. Then, in a voice low and even, he answered, "Because leaving you there would have made me no better than them." Her eyes held his, dark, sharp, and alive again despite her exhaustion. Then she gave a small nod and looked away. She would not thank him. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. But Luke Tanner didn't need gratitude. The quiet between them said enough. He sat awake long after mother and son fell asleep beside the fire, the desert wind whispering through the canyon. The night was alive with small sounds, the trickle of water, the cry of distant coyotes, the crackle of wood. Luke's hand rested on his revolver, but his thoughts were far away. Back to Lila, the wife buried on a hill above his ranch, and to every ghost he'd left unspoken. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but one truth settled deep inside him. He had saved this woman and her boy. Now, whether he liked it or not, he had to see them through the night. Respect, that was what it had turned into between them. Something quiet and unspoken. Caleb lay curled beside the fire, the soft crackle lulling him into sleep. Rosa's breathing had slowed, her face relaxed for the first time since he'd found her on that rock. The tightness in her jaw eased as exhaustion overtook pain. Luke Tanner sat with his back against a slab of sandstone, watching the flames flicker low. The night was cool, the kind that cut deep after a scorched day. He pulled his coat tighter, his revolver within arm's reach. Sleep wasn't something he trusted anymore, not with others depending on him. For years he'd kept to himself on that lonely patch of land he called home. The ranch had been his world. Cattle, fences, long days under the same sun that had nearly killed her. Isolation was easier than the ache that came from losing someone. But now, in this quiet canyon, a woman and her boy had found their way into his life. And there was no turning back. Tomorrow would bring problems, food, shelter, decisions. And for the first time in a long while, Luke wasn't thinking only about himself. Morning crept down the canyon walls in slow, golden bands. Light touched the stream first, then spread to the ashes of last night's fire. Caleb was already awake, crouched by the water, splashing his face, shaking off dreams he wouldn't remember. His laughter was faint, surprised, like he'd forgotten what joy sounded like. Rosa stirred beneath the blanket, her movement careful, deliberate. Her wrists caught her attention, swollen, cut deep by the ropes that had held her. She turned them out of sight quickly, ashamed of the scars someone else had carved into her. Luke had been up long before either of them. He'd checked the traps he'd set along the creek, gathered dry wood, and stacked it neatly near the fire pit. Now he crouched near the stream, running a whetstone along his knife. The sound was steady, calm. The rhythm of a man who'd lived most of his life with purpose in his hands. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms marked by old scars and the kind of strength born from hard work and harder years. Caleb edged closer, curiosity flickering behind his caution. Then Rosa's voice broke the morning stillness, quiet but firmer than before. "You... soldier?" Luke paused, the knife stilling in his hand. Her eyes were sharp, despite her weakness. She'd seen it in him, the discipline, the readiness, the way his hand never strayed far from his gun. He looked up at her, and after a long silence said simply, "Was, a long time ago." His tone was flat, matter of fact, but behind it lay ghosts he didn't name. Rosa gave a small nod and looked away. She didn't need details. She already knew what kind of man the frontier made from soldiers who lived long enough to regret it. But Caleb wasn't done. "Did you fight bad men?" Luke's jaw tightened. Faces came back to him, the friends he'd buried, the enemies who'd looked just as scared. He set the knife aside, his voice low and honest. "I fought. Some were bad. Some were just men trying to stay alive, same as me." He looked the boy straight in the eyes. "War doesn't make heroes, only survivors." Caleb frowned, not fully understanding, but nodded all the same. The woman studied Luke with quiet recognition. She'd fought her own war, against cruelty, hunger, and the cold stares of townsfolk who saw her as less than human. She understood what it meant to live with wounds that didn't show. Later, Luke returned from the traps carrying a rabbit. He worked with practiced ease, cleaning it by the stream. Caleb watched, his small hands folded, his eyes following every motion of the knife. After a while, Luke handed the knife to him, guiding his grip, showing him where to cut. The boy's face lit up, a rare spark of pride. Rosa saw it, and her eyes softened. Her son, learning strength from a stranger who spoke little, but taught much. As the meat roasted over the fire, Caleb's voice wavered with a question that had been building since the clearing. Will they come back? The ones who did this? Luke's gaze stayed on the flames. Maybe. That's why we don't stay in one place. His voice was steady, but his grip on the pan tightened. Rosa pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She'd wondered the same, but hadn't dared ask. Luke glanced at her. We'll head north, he said. Canyon splits into pine country. There's cover, more game. We'll be harder to find. His tone made it clear. This wasn't a suggestion. He had already decided. Rosa's lips parted, as if to ask why he was helping, why he cared. But she didn't. Some answers were better left unspoken. They ate slowly. Caleb smiled faintly when Luke passed him the best piece of meat without hesitation. When the fire died low, Luke rose and began saddling his horse. He turned back toward them. You ride, he said. I'll walk. The boy looked uncertain, but Rosa understood. She let Luke help her mount, his hands steady as he guided her up. Caleb climbed behind her, arms wrapped tight around her waist. Luke secured the blanket around them both, then gave the horse's reins a gentle pat. With the quiet confidence of a man used to leading without words, Luke stepped ahead, boots crunching softly against the dirt path. The canyon narrowed behind them, the sound of running water fading into silence. Rosa's gaze lingered on the back of the man walking before her, the set of his shoulders, the steadiness of his stride. There was no pride in his movements, only resolve. He wasn't just leading them out of the canyon. He was leading them into whatever came next. Rosa Grayhawk understood then that the question was no longer why Luke Tanner had helped them. It was how far he would go now that he had. She could feel his presence ahead of her. Steady, wordless, deliberate. Luke didn't look back, though he sensed her gaze on him. His focus stayed on the trail ahead, his eyes sweeping the horizon, every instinct alert. Inside, though, he wrestled with thoughts he hadn't allowed in years. He'd built a life of solitude, miles of empty land between himself and the world. Yet now he found himself leading a woman and her child through a country that offered danger at every turn. The idea of walking away no longer existed. The trail out of the canyon wound upward through loose rock and dry brush. Luke walked in front, holding the reins, his boots crunching over gravel. Behind him, Rosa sat straight in the saddle, her son Caleb clinging tightly around her waist. Though weak, she was steadier now, her posture proud despite the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. The farther they climbed, the cooler the air became. The first scattered pines gave way to thicker growth, stretching long shadows across the trail. Luke welcomed the shade. The open desert had left them exposed, easy prey for anyone hunting them. Among the trees, they had cover. But cover came with risk. Too many places for a bullet to hide. His gaze shifted constantly, his ears tuned to the smallest sound, the rustle of leaves, the crack of a twig, the cry of a distant bird. Behind him, Caleb's small voice broke the stillness. Will they follow us? The townspeople? The question hung heavy, trembling at the edges. Luke stopped walking and turned to face him. His calm eyes met the boy's. Maybe, he said evenly. Maybe not. But if they do, we'll be ready. It wasn't comfort. It was truth. Luke Tanner had learned long ago that false hope was a crueler poison than fear. The boy seemed to understand and nodded slowly. Rosa's voice followed, rough but steady. They will not forgive. They think I shamed them. She hesitated, her words halting as if everyone carried its own weight. I lived near the town, on the edge. They said I took what wasn't mine. Bread, water, I didn't. They just wanted me gone. She looked straight at him, daring him to judge her. Luke didn't flinch. He'd already known. Town justice, he muttered, the words edged with bitterness. I've seen it before. A crowd gets loud enough, and mercy turns to sport. He glanced at her wrists, still raw and swollen from the ropes. You don't owe them a damn thing? Something in her broke. Not her strength, but the silence that had held her captive. She let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. Not gratitude, not forgiveness, just release. By midday, they reached a clearing near a narrow stream cutting through the pines. Luke stopped and tied the horse to a low branch, the animal pawing softly at the ground. He knelt beside the water, cupping it in his hands before drinking, then nodded for Rosa and Caleb to join him. Caleb scrambled down eagerly, dropping to his knees. Rosa followed more slowly, steadying herself against the rough bark of a pine trunk. She bent to drink, the cold water washing dust from her lips, leaving them trembling but alive. Luke unpacked what little they had: dried beans, a handful of flour, the leftover rabbit meat from the night before. His hands worked without hesitation, efficient and practiced. He built a small fire, set the pan, and stirred quietly as smoke curled into the fading afternoon light. The boy sat close, watching everything, mirroring the man's movements in small gestures. Rosa stayed silent, her gaze thoughtful now, no longer wary. She was beginning to learn the rhythm of this quiet man, the way his silence carried meaning, the way his care showed in action rather than speech. When the food was ready, Luke handed the first portion to Rosa, the second to Caleb, and only then took his own. Caleb frowned. Why do you always eat last? Luke looked at him for a moment, then at Rosa. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Because you two need it more. The boy blinked, processing that, then nodded and ate without another word. Rosa's eyes lingered on Luke a moment longer, her expression softened by something unspoken. Respect, maybe, or curiosity. As dusk crept in, Luke moved around the clearing, marking a rough perimeter. He set noise traps, small stones strung with twine that would rattle if stepped on. Caleb followed, asking questions, eager to learn. Luke answered briefly, teaching by doing, never breaking his quiet focus. Rosa watched from near the fire, the flames lighting her face as she realized this stranger wasn't just helping them survive. He was teaching them how to survive. When the boy finally drifted to sleep, curled in his blanket, Rosa spoke softly. You had family once. Luke froze mid-motion, his hand still over the stack of firewood. The question hit deeper than she knew. He stared into the fire, its glow painting deep lines across his face. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, his voice came low and rough. A wife, he said simply. She's gone. The silence that followed said the rest. Rosa lowered her eyes. She didn't ask how or why. The way he'd said it, soft, like a wound that never closed, told her everything. Luke tossed another piece of wood into the fire and sat down again, his gaze on the dark woods beyond. The air had turned colder. He could smell the pine, the smoke, and something else. the faint metallic scent of coming rain. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't walking this trail for himself anymore. Rosa Grayhawk didn't ask more after that. She didn't need to. Loss was a language she already knew too well. She leaned back against the pine, the rough bark pressing into her shoulders. Her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but when they drifted toward Luke Tanner, they carried something gentler now. A quiet understanding between two people who had both lived through too much. Luke stayed awake long after mother and son fell asleep beside the dying fire. His revolver rested across his lap, his back to the rock wall, eyes fixed on the tree line beyond camp. The forest was still, but stillness didn't mean safety. He thought of the town they'd left behind, the faces twisted with hate, the kind of cruelty that could tie a woman to a rock under the sun and call it justice. He thought of Caleb, the way the boy had started looking at him like he was someone to trust. That trust felt heavy in Luke's chest, an old ache he hadn't wanted to feel again. He'd spent years living only for himself, his days reduced to work and silence. But now, sitting under the whispering pines with a woman and her son depending on him, he knew he'd stepped into a fight that wasn't his. Yet somehow, it had become his all the same. If they came for her, they'd have to go through him. The fire burned low, its last embers flickering orange against the darkness. The sound of Rosa's breathing and the soft rustle of the boy's blanket replaced the ghosts that used to fill his nights. For the first time in years, Luke Tanner wasn't alone, and the realization unsettled him more than the thought of gunfire. By dawn, the forest was a hushed blur of gray light. Luke hadn't slept. He sat with his back against a pine, revolver in hand, watching the fog curl around the treetops. The campfire was nothing but ash now, thin smoke coiling into the morning air. Rosa and Caleb slept close together, unaware of the unease settling in his gut. He had learned to trust his instincts long ago, and now every part of him was telling him they weren't alone. When Caleb stirred, Luke raised a hand, signaling silence. He pointed toward the soft dirt beyond the camp. The boy's sleepy eyes followed, and then widened. Fresh hoofprints. 4, maybe 5 horses, moving slow, close to the trees. Luke stood, scanning the ground. The spacing told him they'd passed during the night, keeping low and quiet. His jaw tightened. He didn't need to guess who they were. Sheriff Deke Lawson wouldn't rest until he'd finished what he started, and he'd bring his kind of justice riding behind him. Virgil Crane, Jed Barrett, Hank Doyle. He walked back toward camp, his face hardening. Rosa was awake now, the blanket drawn around her shoulders. She read the truth in his eyes before he said a word. "They're coming?" she asked softly. He gave a single nod. "Not far. Maybe a day behind." Caleb pressed himself against her side, small fingers gripping her arm tight. Luke crouched before them, his voice steady but sharp. "We can't stay here. Pack up now." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His tone carried the kind of authority that left no space for argument. Rosa moved quickly, despite her fatigue, gathering what little they had. As they packed, Caleb's voice broke the silence. "Why are they so cruel? Why do they want her dead?" Luke paused, tightening the strap on his saddlebag. His answer came low, measured. "Fear. Hate. That's all it takes sometimes." He looked at the boy, his eyes hard but not unkind. "But that doesn't mean we let them win." The boy said nothing more, but his expression changed, somewhere between fear and resolve. They set off north, deeper into pine country. The terrain grew rough, the trails narrower, the air cooler. Luke led the horse carefully along the ridge, scanning for cover, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Roots, angles, distance, bullets. He knew how to fight. But this wasn't about killing. It was about keeping them breathing. At midday, they reached a high ridge. Luke shaded his eyes and looked out across the valley. A faint cloud of dust moved far below. 5 riders, slow but steady. His chest tightened. They were being tracked. He led the horse down the far side, where the ground turned rocky and soft pine needles muffled the hooves. The forest closed around them, thick and dark, swallowing their trail. When they stopped beside a stream to rest, Rosa turned toward him. Her voice was quiet, almost too calm. "You could leave us," she said. "It would be safer for you." Luke's eyes lifted to hers. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he shook his head once. "That's not my way." No anger, no hesitation. Just truth. She held his gaze, something fierce and fragile in her expression. The boy watched them both, as if trying to understand why a man with no blood tie would risk everything for them. He didn't know the answer, and neither did Luke. Not in words, but it showed in what he did, keeping watch while they slept, giving them food before taking any for himself, walking beside the horse so they could rest. Caleb seemed to sense that was reason enough. By late afternoon, storm clouds rolled over the mountains, dark and heavy. Thunder growled across the sky. Luke glanced upward. Rain could be mercy or misery, depending on which way you rode. It would slow them down, but it would also wipe away tracks. "Come on," he said, quickening his pace. "There's shelter not far from here." The wind picked up, carrying the sharp smell of rain. The first drops hit as they reached the mouth of a shallow cave tucked into the side of the hill. Luke led the horse inside first, checking the walls, the ceiling, every dark corner with practiced caution before signaling it was safe. He turned back toward Rosa and the boy, rain streaking his hat brim. "We'll wait it out here," he said. Thunder cracked above them as they stepped into the cave, and for one fleeting moment, before the storm broke in full, Luke Tanner allowed himself to feel the quiet satisfaction of having gotten them this far alive. Luke Tanner built a small fire near the cave's mouth, just enough to chase away the chill without letting the smoke drift far. The rain hammered down outside, turning the mountainside into a blur of silver lines. Inside, warmth flickered weakly against cold stone. Caleb huddled against Rosa Grayhawk, her blanket drawn close around both of them. The steady rhythm of the rain filled the silence, until Rosa finally asked the question that had lingered since she'd first looked into Luke's eyes. "You said you had a wife. What happened to her?" Luke froze. The firelight carved his face in amber and shadow, deepening the lines of a man who'd carried too much loss for too long. He didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed fixed on the flames, as though they might speak for him. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and rough, like a man forcing words through memories best left buried. "Fever took her. Nothing I could do. I buried her down by the creek behind the house." He stopped there. The silence that followed said more than any words could. Rosa's eyes lowered, her fingers tightening around the wool blanket. Grief was something she knew. The slow ache that never really left. Caleb pressed closer to her side, sensing the heaviness in the air but saying nothing. Outside, the storm raged, wind howling through the pines. Luke sat near the entrance, revolver across his lap, eyes scanning the darkness. Somewhere beyond the curtain of rain, he knew Sheriff Deke Lawson and his riders were still out there, hunting. But behind him, the quiet breathing of Rosa and her boy anchored him in a way that battle never had. He had made his choice. If the riders came, they'd find him waiting. The fire crackled softly, and for the first time since their paths crossed, Caleb fell asleep without fear creasing his face. Rosa's eyes closed soon after, exhaustion claiming her. Luke didn't move. He stayed there, unmoving, the glow of the dying fire lighting the steel of his revolver. By morning, the storm had weakened, leaving behind a gray mist that hung low between the trees. The air smelled of wet earth and pine sap. Luke stepped out first, boots sinking into soft mud. Every movement was careful, deliberate. He crouched near the mouth of the cave and ran 2 fingers through the muck. Hoofprints. Fresh. 4, maybe 5 riders. He rose slowly, jaw tight. They were closing in. When he returned inside, Rosa was awake, her dark eyes following him. She didn't need to ask, but she did anyway. "They're close, aren't they?" "Closer than I'd like," he replied. He checked the revolver at his hip, then the rifle strapped to the saddle. Every bullet mattered now. He didn't have enough for mistakes. Caleb stirred, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Did they find us?" "Not yet," Luke said, crouching down to meet his gaze. "But they will. You need to be ready to move when I say." His voice was firm, but even. He didn't sugarcoat the truth. He'd learned long ago that children understood danger better than most men believed. Caleb nodded, small face hardening with resolve beyond his years. They packed quickly. Rosa moved slower than she liked, her wrists still raw from the ropes, pain tightening her jaw each time she lifted something. She caught Luke watching her and straightened her back, refusing pity. The rain had eased to a drizzle by the time they mounted up. Luke led the horse along a narrow deer path that wound upward into thicker timber. His senses stayed sharp, scanning for movement, sound, or the gleam of metal. Questions filled his mind, the kind every man in his position would ask but never say aloud. Would he stand and fight? Or keep them hidden and hope luck stayed on their side? Could he protect them both when the time came? He had fought wars before, but never one like this. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking an open stretch of valley. Luke crouched low and peered through the pines. Down below, moving slow through the wet terrain, came 5 riders. He recognized their shapes even at a distance. Lawson, his hat low and his coat dark against the rain. Crane, Barrett, and Doyle, their horses slick with mud, rifles slung across their backs. Men who believed cruelty made them righteous. Caleb's breath hitched. Rosa pulled him closer, brushing his hair back with a trembling hand, though her eyes never left the riders. Luke motioned them down behind the ridge. "Stay low, don't move." For nearly an hour, they stayed hidden while the riders combed the valley, circling like wolves on a fresh scent. One dismounted, crouched, and touched the mud, then pointed north. Their voices carried faintly through the damp air. Luke's pulse stayed even, but every muscle in his body was ready. If one of them turned uphill, he'd have to act fast. At last, the riders remounted and moved on, their silhouettes vanishing into the trees. Luke exhaled slowly. Relief didn't show on his face, but the tension in his shoulders eased a fraction. "They'll be back," he murmured, half to himself. "Men like that don't quit easy." He turned to Rosa and Caleb, their faces pale in the gray light. "We keep moving. We find higher ground before nightfall." And as the echo of hoofbeats faded into the mist, Luke Tanner, rancher, widower, and now reluctant guardian, tightened his grip on the reins and led them deeper into the wild, where the mountains waited and fate rode close behind. Luke Tanner's voice was calm, but certain when he said it. "We can't keep running. They'll chase us till there's nowhere left to go. We need ground that works in our favor." Rosa Grayhawk frowned, clutching her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You mean to fight?" Luke's blue-gray eyes stayed steady on hers. "If they force it, yes. I won't let them take you back." The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Caleb looked between them, fear shadowing his small face. But beneath it was a fragile trust that hadn't been there before. Rosa's pride battled with the truth of what he'd said. Finally, she gave a single nod. "Then we stand with you." Luke didn't answer. He just gave a faint tilt of his head, the kind a man gives when he's already decided what must be done. He led them deeper into the forest, past the thick undergrowth, and toward a bend in the land where jagged boulders rose out of the ground like old bones. A narrow trail wound through it, tight and defensible. Luke remembered the place from years ago when he'd ridden as a scout. One man with good aim could hold off 5 if he had patience and the right cover. They stopped there. As night fell, the forest grew still around them. Luke worked quickly, his movements quiet and efficient. He showed Caleb how to stack stones to block the trail, and laid branches where a man's boot would crack them loud enough to give warning. The boy followed every instruction without complaint, mimicking Luke's careful hands, as though learning gave him courage. Rosa prepared the last of their food by the fire, her hands trembling slightly but never stopping. Her eyes flicked toward Luke often, as if watching him anchored her against fear. When the flames burned low, she finally spoke. "You're risking your life for us. You don't even know me." Luke paused, tightening the strap on his rifle. The firelight caught his face, painting him in amber and shadow. "I know enough," he said quietly. "They left you to die. That's reason enough for me." His words were plain, without poetry or pretense, but they struck deep. Rosa held his gaze longer this time. There was no pity in his eyes, only conviction. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe they might survive the night. Outside, the forest was silent, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that waited, coiled and listening. Caleb drifted to sleep with his head on his mother's lap. Rosa stayed near the fire, watching Luke as he loaded his rifle, one round at a time, every motion slow and deliberate. Then he sat back against the rock wall, the weapon resting across his knees. They were no longer running. The line had been drawn. Luke Tanner, once a man who lived only to keep to himself, now had something worth standing for. And he intended to hold it, even if it cost him everything. The night passed without rest. Luke stayed awake, eyes fixed on the narrow trail beyond the firelight. The forest whispered with the drip of water and the shifting wind. Every sound carried meaning to a man who'd lived long enough to know when trouble was close. The first light crept through the trees, pale and cold. Rosa and Caleb still slept, their breaths steady, and Luke took a quiet moment to look at them. The two souls whose survival had somehow become his responsibility. He'd stood guard in war before, nights when silence pressed heavier than battle. But this time, it was different. Back then, he'd fought because someone told him to. Now he fought because he chose to. By dawn, he was already on his feet, checking the snares and the stones lining the trail. His footprints traced the same path over and over, each step slow and measured. 5 men against 1. He knew the odds were grim. But terrain, patience, and will could bend numbers. And he had all 3. Rosa stirred awake, wincing as she pushed herself upright. Her wrists still burned, her body weary from too many days of fear. yet her eyes were steady when they found him. "If you fall," she asked softly, "what becomes of us?" Luke froze for a moment, then turned to her. His reply was simple but edged with steel. "That's why I won't fall." The words weren't comfort, they were a vow, and though they didn't erase her fear, they silenced her doubt. When Caleb woke, Luke gave him small tasks, carrying branches, setting stones, placing twigs where footsteps would snap. Each sound trap would give them seconds, maybe less. But it was something. The boy asked questions, his voice hushed but curious. "Why put stones there? Why hide like this? Why wait so still?" Luke answered without looking up. "Because the man who moves first lives longest." Caleb nodded, repeating the phrase under his breath like a lesson he wanted to remember. By midday, the woods grew unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that made even birds vanish. Luke's gut tightened. Trouble had found them. He crouched low, eyes narrowing towards the tree line. Then, snap, a twig, then another. The wind carried the faint sound of hooves and leather creaking. Rosa stiffened, pulling Caleb close. Luke motioned them toward the largest boulder, his voice low but steady. "Stay down. Don't make a sound." Caleb's eyes were wide, his small body trembling. Luke's hand rested briefly on the boy's shoulder. "No matter what you hear," he whispered, "you stay still." Then he rose, rifle ready. The first rider emerged through the pines, horse moving slow, rifle across his chest. Another followed, then 3 more, fanning out like they'd done this many times before. Their faces were hard, eyes sharp with the certainty of men who thought justice was theirs alone. From below, a voice rang out. Sheriff Deke Lawson. "You up there? We know you got her. That woman's a thief. Best hand her back before worse comes of it." Luke stepped from behind the rocks, his rifle lowered but ready, his broad frame filling the narrow pass. His voice came deep and steady. "She's not yours to take." The echo of his words rolled through the pines, and for a long moment, no one spoke. But every man there knew. The fight had already begun. Luke Tanner stood tall in the narrow gap, his hat brim shadowing his eyes, the rifle steady in his hands. Rainwater still clung to his coat, dripping slow into the mud between his boots. When he spoke, his voice cut clean through the quiet. "She's not yours to take, not now, not ever." The lead rider, Sheriff Deke Lawson, spat into the dirt, a cruel smirk twisting his mouth. "You don't know what she's done, Tanner. She don't belong here. We gave her our judgment, and you undid it. That makes you one of them now." Luke's jaw tightened, but his rifle stayed low, not yet aimed. He said nothing, letting the silence do its own work. His gaze never left theirs. He'd met men like Lawson before, those who hid behind the word justice to do crueler things than any outlaw ever dared. He measured his choices in the stillness. Maybe he could talk them down, but he already knew men like this didn't turn back without the sting of lead forcing them to. Once blood was called for, someone always paid the price. Behind the rocks, Rosa Grayhawk pressed a trembling hand over her son's mouth, her body coiled tight. She could see the quiet strength in Luke's shoulders, the way his breath stayed steady even with rifles aimed his way. In that moment, she knew the truth that neither of them had spoken. He would die before letting them take her. One of Lawson's men, Virgil Crane, kicked his horse forward, pistol drawn. That was all it took. Luke lifted his rifle in one smooth, practiced motion. "That's far enough," he said. The rider froze. For a long moment, the canyon held its breath. The air was thick with the kind of tension that always came before killing. Rosa held Caleb close, whispering softly in her people's tongue, old words meant to steady a frightened heart. Lawson sneered, his voice hard. "We'll be back, Tanner. And when we come, you won't have a place to hide." He yanked the reins, turning his horse. One by one, the riders followed, their eyes locked on Luke until the forest swallowed them whole. Only when the last hoofbeat faded did Luke lower his rifle. He exhaled slowly, the sound almost a sigh. Rosa stepped from behind the rocks, Caleb clinging to her side. The boy's face was pale, but his eyes burned with awe. Rosa met Luke's gaze, pride and gratitude warring with something deeper. Recognition. This man was no longer just a passerby who'd cut her loose. He had chosen their side. Luke sat down on a boulder, reloading his rifle with deliberate care. "They'll come again," he said quietly. "And next time, it won't end with words." The fire that night was small and silent. The mood was heavier than the rain-soaked air, yet beneath the fear was a shift none of them dared name. Rosa no longer saw Luke as a stranger. Caleb no longer thought of him as a protector passing through. And Luke, though he'd never admit it, no longer thought of them as a burden he'd taken on by accident. They were his now. For better or worse, the line had been drawn. Morning came gray and cold, the scent of wet pine thick in the air. Luke hadn't slept. He stood at the edge of camp, rifle balanced in his arm, watching the tree line with the stillness of a man who had done this too many times before. He'd seen this pattern in war. Men like Lawson always kept their word. Pride and cruelty, those two things never died easy. Behind him, Rosa stirred awake, drawing her blanket tight. She had slept little, but her eyes were clear when she rose. Caleb woke next, his small voice quiet but steady. "They're coming again, aren't they?" Luke nodded once. "Yes. Today or tomorrow." He crouched so he was level with the boy. "When it happens, you stay with your mother. Don't move unless I tell you." Caleb swallowed hard, but nodded. There was fear in him, but courage too. The kind that only comes from watching another stand unflinching in front of danger. Rosa stepped closer, her tone calm but certain. "We can't keep running, Luke. They'll follow as long as we draw breath." Luke studied her face for a moment, then gave a faint nod. "Then we make our stand." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Luke showed Caleb how to stack stones into a low wall that could stop bullets, how to place branches where men's boots would snap them, and how to use silence like a weapon. The boy listened as if every word might be his salvation. Rosa gathered herbs from the forest floor, grinding them into poultices. Her hands moved quickly, efficiently. She had no gun, but she knew the ways of healing, and she suspected she'd be needing them before the day was done. By sundown, the air had grown heavy again. Then came the sound, low, rhythmic, certain. Hooves. Luke's eyes flicked toward the bend in the trail. "They're here," he murmured. He pushed Rosa and Caleb behind the stone wall, their breaths quick in the cold air. Then he took position a few yards ahead, kneeling behind a boulder, rifle resting steady on its ridge. His revolver sat holstered at his hip, close enough to draw. His heartbeat slowed, that old soldier's calm settling over him, the one that came when death drew near but fear had no room left to live. 5 riders emerged from the trees, horses slick with rain, guns drawn. Sheriff Lawson reined his mount at the front, his voice sharp and sure. "Last chance, Tanner," he called. "Hand her over and you walk away alive." Luke didn't flinch. The wind shifted through the pines, carrying the smell of wet earth and gunpowder waiting to happen. He thumbed back the hammer of his rifle, the click echoing like thunder before the storm. "If you want her," he said, his voice low and unshaken, "you'll have to come through me." The riders tensed, hands tightening on their guns, and in that breathless pause before violence, Luke Tanner, the quiet rancher who'd once sworn never to fight again, knew that this was the battle he'd been riding toward his whole life. Luke Tanner's voice rang through the pines, cold, steady, and unyielding. "She's not yours to take." The words carried like a warning bell through the mist. Sheriff Deke Lawson sneered, spitting into the mud. "She's a thief, Tanner, a burden, nothing but trouble." Luke's eyes didn't waver. "She's a mother," he said, his tone flat as iron, "and that's worth more than any of you'll ever be." The insult landed like a bullet. Rage twisted through Lawson's men. The first gunshot cracked the silence, sudden, deafening. A muzzle flash flared from behind a pine. Luke dropped to one knee and fired back, his rifle jerking against his shoulder. One rider pitched backward off his horse, crashing into the dirt with a dull thud. The others fanned out fast, returning fire. Bullets ripped bark and stone. The air filled with the sharp smell of gunpowder and pine sap. Behind the boulders, Rosa Grayhawk shielded Caleb, wrapping her body over his as splinters rained down around them. She dared a glance toward Luke and saw him standing firm, calm, focused, every move measured. The man fought like the land itself, unyielding, ancient, and raw. The fight was quick and brutal. Luke fired again, dropping a second rider who tried to flank him. When his rifle emptied, he switched to his revolver in one fluid motion. The cylinder spun, smoke curled, and the chaos roared on. A bullet grazed his arm, tearing through cloth and skin. He gritted his teeth but didn't flinch. Pain was an old acquaintance. One of the last riders, Jed Barrett, charged up the slope, pistol raised. Rosa didn't think. Her hand closed around a jagged stone, and she hurled it with all her strength. It struck the man's temple, hard enough to break his aim. Luke's next shot finished it. For a heartbeat, the forest was still. Luke turned, his eyes finding Rosa's. There was no need for words. Gratitude, respect, and the grim understanding that this fight had bound them together tighter than any vow. When the last shot faded, silence returned heavy and final. 3 men lay dead. 2 more bolted into the woods, horses crashing through the trees in panic. Luke stood breathing hard, his revolver empty, blood seeping through his sleeve. He scanned the clearing once more before lowering the weapon. Caleb crawled from behind the rocks, face pale, eyes wide with awe. "You're hurt," he cried, voice shaking. Luke knelt down, resting a rough hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's nothing I can't carry." His voice was even, though his arm trembled from blood loss. Rosa was already beside him, tearing a strip from her dress to wrap the wound. Her hands were steady, her touch firm. She didn't look away from him, and he didn't look away from her. For a long moment they were silent, bound by something neither had chosen, but both accepted. As the sun dipped low, painting the trees in burnt gold, Luke built a small fire. Caleb lay sleeping against Rosa's lap, his breaths soft and even. Luke sat across from them, his arm bound in her makeshift bandage, his rifle leaning close by. Rosa's eyes lingered on him through the flicker of flame. "You've saved us," she said quietly. "More than once, I won't forget." Luke held her gaze, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "We'll see it through," he said simply. "All of us." For the first time in years, he let himself believe those words. The fire burned low, its smoke curling up through the cold night air. The scent of pine and gunpowder clung to the ground. Luke sat near the edge of the camp, his body sore but his mind sharp. The forest was quiet again, save for the low hiss of embers. Rosa smoothed her son's hair, her eyes softening as she watched him sleep. Across the flames, she looked to Luke, studying him the way one studies the edge of a blade, dangerous but capable of protection. "Will they come again?" she asked at last, her voice hushed but steady. Luke didn't look up from the fire. "No. The ones who ran will spread the tale. The others won't stomach chasing what nearly killed them." She watched his face, gauging his certainty, then nodded. Slowly, her shoulders eased. For the first time since being left tied to that sun-baked rock, she felt something like peace. Luke leaned back against the stone wall, exhaustion pulling at him. For years he'd lived with only ghosts for company. But now, as he looked at Rosa and Caleb, a quiet realization settled in his chest. He wasn't alone anymore. Would he leave them once the danger passed? The thought lingered for a moment, but the answer came as sure as the dawn. No, he wouldn't. The next morning, the three of them set out north. The trail wound through tall pines until the trees thinned and the land opened into a small green valley. In its center stood an old cabin, weathered wood, the roof sagging, the door crooked but still hanging. Luke stopped at the sight, something almost wistful in his expression. "I knew this place," he said quietly. "An old scout station. Haven't seen it in years." Caleb's eyes lit with wonder. "Can it be ours?" Luke looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "If we're willing to work for it." They went to work right away. Luke patched holes in the roof with pine shingles he carved by hand. Caleb gathered stones for the hearth, laughing each time he found one shaped like an arrowhead. Rosa hauled water from the nearby stream and laid herbs to dry along the porch rail. The work was hard, but it was honest. And for the first time in a long while, it built something instead of breaking it. When the day ended, the three of them sat together outside the cabin, watching the sunset spill over the valley. The boy leaned against his mother, the woman against the man who'd risked his life to give them this quiet moment. Luke Tanner looked out across the hills, his heart heavy and full all at once. He had lost everything once before, but now, beneath that vast western sky, he felt something he'd thought buried with his wife, Lila Tanner. Hope. The days that followed brought a kind of peace Luke Tanner hadn't known in years. The cabin, old and half forgotten when they'd found it, began to breathe again under their hands. Rosa Grayhawk scrubbed years of dust from the floor, humming softly in her native tongue, a melody both mournful and tender. At night, she sewed together pieces of cloth to make blankets for her son, her voice rising and falling like the wind that slipped through the pine trees outside. Caleb tried his best to help, hauling water, fetching wood, swinging an axe far too big for him. His clumsy chopping made Luke laugh under his breath, a sound so rare it startled even him. He hadn't heard that sound, his own laughter, in a very long time. Rosa noticed. Her eyes lifted from her stitching, catching that brief glimmer of warmth across his face. She said nothing, but for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled without pain shadowing it. That night, the fire burned steady in the hearth. Caleb lay curled near it, fast asleep, his small hand tucked beneath his cheek. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and stew, of life beginning again. Rosa sat across from Luke at the small wooden table, her hands folded quietly in her lap. "You could still leave," she said softly. Her tone held no bitterness, just the steady question of a woman who had learned never to trust promises too easily. Luke looked up, meeting her gaze head-on. "I could," he said, his voice calm, unhurried. Then he shook his head. "But I won't." Something in his words carried weight beyond the moment. He studied her face. The dignity no cruelty had managed to break. the quiet strength that had endured shame and hunger and a noose of false justice. He saw the tenderness in how she looked at her son, the fierce love that had made her survive. "I was done living for myself," Luke said quietly. "That ended the day I cut you free." Rosa's breath caught. Her eyes fell, but not before a faint flush of warmth crossed her face. For a moment she seemed lost for words. Then, almost without thinking, she reached across the table and placed her hand lightly over his. His hand, calloused, scarred from years of work and war, turned and closed around hers with care. No words passed between them. None were needed. Later, when the fire burned low and the cabin had gone still, Luke stepped outside. Rosa followed, her shawl drawn close against the cool night air. The valley stretched quiet and wide beneath a sky filled with stars. The sound of crickets carried softly from the grass. Behind them, the faint glow from the cabin window spilled across the clearing where Caleb slept safe for the first time in his young life. Luke stood at the edge of the porch, looking out at the land. "This is home now," he said finally, his voice low and certain. Rosa's gaze followed his toward the dark hills. "Home," she repeated, as if testing the word. Then she nodded. Her hand brushed his, just enough to make the promise real. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. And for the first time since burying Lila Tanner, Luke no longer imagined leaving at sunrise with nothing but his horse and his shadow for company. They stood together in silence, two souls that the world had tried to break. One left to die in the sun, one who had been dead inside long before. Now, neither was alone. A woman once bound and left to perish, a boy who had cried out for mercy, and a man who thought he had nothing left to give. Each had found something stronger than survival. Under the endless sky of the American frontier, they found belonging. Not escape, not vengeance, but the rarest thing the West could ever offer, a reason to stay. And this time, Luke Tanner stayed.